Welcome back to the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. Arab Detroit is constantly in flux. In the last 10 years, new communities of refugees from Syria, Iraq, and Yemen have settled here. And each new community brings with them different perspectives of what it means to make it in America, to be American. Now, the backdrop is that many have fled political crises that the U.S. has initiated or intensified. But when they arrive in the United States, some Arabs in Metro Detroit learn that speaking up about these conflicts can be a thorny matter. Still, the last 10 years have ushered in a new wave of political representation and engagement led by Arab lawmakers and Arab residents. The new book, Beyond Refuge in Arab Detroit, explores how life is changing for Arab Americans in Detroit and what it means to thrive here during a time of intense political turmoil, both here in the U.S. and also in many of the countries Arabs have fled. It weaves together writings from multiple contributors who delve into politics, environmental justice, and sexual stigma and violence, all through the lens of Arabs in Metro Detroit. Sally Howell is one of the editors of the book. She's a professor of history and Arab American studies at University of Michigan-Dearborn, and she joins us now on one of the last days of Arab American Heritage Month. Professor Howell, welcome back to the Metro.
Good morning, Robin. How are you?
I am well, thank you. So this is the third book in your series looking at Arab American life in Metro Detroit. The focus is on changing dynamics for Arab people here over the last decade. First, could you remind us just how diverse Arab communities in Detroit are?
Sure. So the population started coming here in the 1890s. So it's a community that has a deep history in the area, a history that in many ways parallels that of any other immigrant community or Eastern European, Southern European community that came and was attracted by the auto industry in particular. But so that early group was mostly people coming from what is either today Syria or Lebanon or Palestine. There were some Iraqis who came early as well. But in the community really grew and changed after our immigration laws changed in the 1960s. And, and it's continued to change in this century, as you mentioned, because so many people are coming as refugees. So today in Dearborn, the population is made up of, the Yemeni community in Dearborn is perhaps a third of the population in the city. I mean, it's a really large, or a third of the Arab population there. And you've got a very large Chaldean population in the northern suburbs. You've got a Christian population that sort of moved also to the north and to the east, whereas Arab Americans, Muslim Americans from Iraq or Syria or Yemen or Palestine or Lebanon tend to be moving west toward Novi and Canton and places like that. So it's a geographically dispersed population. It's in terms of national origins, a very diverse group. In terms of religious background, it's also diverse. And it's diverse in terms of socioeconomic status. So people live in some of, very impoverished neighborhoods in the city of Detroit, and people also live in some of the wealthiest suburbs.
Now, Professor Howell, could you orient us around what the time period this book covers, which is from 2016 to 2023, what it looked like for these different communities of Arab Americans in the area? What are some key ways this time period differed from previous decades?
Well, it's interesting because when we started to write the book, when most of the writing was done, it was looking like, we started writing around 2018 in that period, and we were really thinking about how the community was faring as it came out of the Trump era, right? The first Trump presidency, and looking at how, despite the fact that Trump tried to impose did impose a Muslim travel ban, and, he ran for office on this really extreme anti-immigrant platform, and, had many people in his cabinet who were anti-Muslim in particular. And so we were looking at how, despite this national landscape, the communities here in the metro area seem to be really thriving. And not just thriving, but gaining like their political legs. And really, we saw, Rashida Tlaib win office. Now we have Arab American mayors in Hamtramck and Dearborn Heights and Dearborn. And there just seemed to be this maturation, if you will, of the politics of the community. And then, of course, while we were working on the book, we had the attacks of October 2023, and then followed by this horrific genocide in Palestine, where a lot of the political gains that the community seemed to have made in the early part of this decade seem to have really just disappeared. And now so many people in the community feel politically orphaned, right?
Mm.
But I will say that despite that, the economic success of the community, the institutional accomplishments of the community, I mean, it's just it's a community that is really feels at home here in Detroit and continues to make a home for itself in Detroit and continues to bring in and incorporate some of these new populations that are arriving because of war and conflict overseas.
I want to zoom in a little bit when you talk about the ways that more Arabs in Metro Detroit have been stepping into politics or becoming politically engaged. As you've noted, Arabs are not a monolith. And when we consider the path to politics that many have taken, that really depends on whether you are Muslim, whether you are Christian Arab or Chaldean. As briefly as you can, what are some of the main differences in terms of the political paths that these different Arab communities have taken?
Well, so, to take the Chaldean population, for example, they're a demographically very large presence in the northern suburbs, especially in both Oakland and Macomb counties. And, that's a mix of very prosperous, populations with a lot of new refugees who have come as a result of the recent wars in Iraq, in particular, the sort of genocidal rampage of ISIS, right? So this was a Christian population that was being targeted. And people came here, and they came here with frustration over the treatment their population had received at home. Perhaps they brought with them some negative feelings about Muslims in particular. And so this group sort of, considered itself to be one of the demographic powerhouses that in fact put Trump in office during his first election, right? So they have really found a home for themselves in the Republican Party. Whereas in a city like Dearborn, where you had, this working class population, a long legacy of sort of progressive democratic politics, you sort of saw the opposite, right, of what was happening in the northern suburbs. And in Dearborn, we've seen people, the political issues that are important to people are, in fighting for environmental justice, fighting for gender equity, fighting for better public schools, for free education in college. For people wanted that elevator, right? That American, elevator that lifts people out of poverty. And people were really sort of fighting on the progressive end of the political spectrum there, and fighting, as people of color, as a minority population, fighting alongside other minority communities in the Detroit area. So it's this mix, right, that makes the population so dynamic.
And Professor Howell, as we talk about how Arab folks in the area have grown in power and status over time, it also has me wondering how this area has helped shape them. How have they shaped Detroit and Dearborn, and within the last 10 years?
Yeah, well, I mean, I love that question because it's just so, I mean, you could say Detroit, Dearborn, the northern suburbs too. I mean, if you look at Dearborn, where it's a majority Arab American population now, 54% of the population was Arab as of the 2020 census. So we can only assume that percentage has gone up, right? And there's just such diversity in the Arab community there. So we have, new Iraqi business districts developing along Warren Avenue in Warrendale in the city of Detroit, but then also in Dearborn. And we've got this, efflorescence of Yemeni culture that's spreading sort of from East Dearborn to the west. This you and I talked a few weeks ago about the coffee the coffee houses that are now a
Yeah.
national phenomenon. And you see the same thing when you go up into like Sterling Heights, Madison Heights. You can follow the Chaldean community, which is clearly sort of influencing the culture of the suburbs, bringing new food, new traditions, and things like that. But it's also a lot more subtle. So it's the way people interact with each other in the neighborhoods. It's people sharing food over the fence. People growing grapes, and then other people coming and picking their grape leaves and sharing, stuffed grape leaves with one another. And even, things like the way people adapt houses to make the houses more comfortable for their families and things like that. It's just the very fiber of the city, the metro area, has really been influenced by this. And there's no part of the economy that you can think about that doesn't include Arab Americans. Civil rights lawyers, store owners. I just read yesterday that a Syrian doctor bought one of the towers from the Renaissance Center.
Mm.
So it's like the highly diverse. Your doctor is likely to be Arab American, and the janitor of your office building is also likely to be Arab American. Your Uber driver, this sort of thing. So I think that it's one of the great things about being here in Michigan is that people tend to be very familiar with the Arab and other Middle Eastern populations in the area.
This is the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. We're talking about Arab refugees and immigrants who've recently settled in Metro Detroit, how those communities are changing and how they've changed these areas. Our guest is Professor Sally Howell. Her new book is Beyond Refuge in Arab Detroit. Professor Howell, Beyond Refuge in Arab Detroit weaves together a lot of writing from different contributors. Now, I want to explore one of the chapters that you co-wrote. It opens with a strong quote, and that is, "The subtext of everything we do is racism." Could you explain that quote to us?
Yeah, so this is a quote from someone who was working in Abdullah Hamid's sort of cabinet in Dearborn when he first came into office. And in Dearborn, there has been this long history of sort of conflict between East Dearborn and West Dearborn. West Dearborn representing sort of in the old days, it was the management side of town. It was where Henry Ford had his house and put a lot of his upper management people, and many of his family members lived in these beautiful arts and crafts homes that were developed in West Dearborn, versus East Dearborn, which was, has always been a home to newly arriving immigrants. Neighborhoods like the South End, which is in the shadow of the Rouge Factory, sort of between Patton Park and Detroit and the Rouge Factory, which continues to be to this day a receiving area for newly arrived people. A century ago, there were people from Eastern Europe, Southern Europe, very diverse population. Today, they're uniformly from Yemen. I mean, there are some Iraqis who live there, and maybe some Sudanese immigrants and other African Muslim immigrants, but it's a predominantly Yemeni neighborhood. And there was this sort of tension in town between the newly arrived people and the really Anglo side of the population, sort of old waspy Dearborn, And over the last century, as the Lebanese community in particular has grown and gained economic success, they have moved into West Dearborn. And now they sort of represent they sort of represent that old Anglo identity of the city in response to some of the newer people who are coming from Yemen or Iraq or Syria, who now occupy East Dearborn. So there's that dynamic within the Arab community between the new people and the more established people. But also when Hamid first ran for office, the campaign, I think he tried very hard. I think a lot of people tried very hard to not be a campaign about his Arabness, like, was he the best candidate for the city? Not was he going to win specifically because the demographics had changed, but because, if you look at the way people talk in Dearborn about, especially in the early years of his a mayorship, right?
Hmm.
I think they were, people were eager to see him playing favorites, favoring one part of basically favoring the Arab community over the non-Arab community. And so you saw on social media and in city council meetings and things like this, people accusing one another of playing favorites like this, right? And I think that's what this person meant when they said, everything we do is about race. Anything that the mayor does, he's seen as, representing the Arab community instead of the city as a whole. But I do think that has really changed over the last 4 years as he's sort of, very obviously tried to work to improve conditions for people across the city. And so that concern or fear that people had in the beginning has faded away as his, actual work as the mayor has transformed, the city and his own reputation.
So you would say that he's made that concerted effort then, and it's had impacts as far as not playing so-called favorites.
Absolutely. I mean, just as a little example, this is one we give in the book. In his first weeks in office, there was he took the traditional Christmas tree lighting ceremony, that has been a long-standing ceremony in Dearborn, and he just, made it, he brought in a live tree from East Dearborn and planted this tree in front of the Performing Arts Center, and made a much bigger tree, had a much more bigger spectacle of the tree lighting ceremony. He really made a big deal out of this, right? And it's kind of funny because the person who is playing the Grinch is a Muslim American, and the mayor is a Muslim American, and the chief of police is a Muslim American. But still, they put together this really elaborate Christmas celebration, right? And then a few weeks later, he also hosted in the Performing Arts Center a celebration or a viewing party, a watch party for the World Cup when Morocco was playing France in the World Cup. And this was an event that was very popular for the Arab part of the community. He could do both of these in the space of a few weeks, So he's clearly, accommodating the city's past and also making room for the city's present or future.
I'm wondering about how to go back to this notion of racism in this area. I mean, anti-Arab and anti-Blackness have been a part of Southeast Michigan in general for some time. How do you think racism has changed in the area? I mean, based on your scholarship, what are ways that racism shows up now versus, let's say, 20 or 30 years ago in Dearborn?
Well, I mean, if you go back 20 years ago, we were in the period of, post 9/11 politics, and the Islamophobia in the city and just anti-Arab racism were both very intense. This is a period when Dearborn actually really grew demographically because so many Arab Americans who were in other parts of the metro region or in other parts of the country wanted to come to a place where they felt safe. It seemed like Dearborn was, some people referred to it as having sort of like an invisibility cloak over it, that protected the city. And it was just the sheer numbers that did this. And, a lot of that discrimination and racism was perpetrated by the state. It was the institutions of law enforcement and the state sort of surveilling the population, making immigration more difficult, harassing people at the borders or as they traveled or, in so many different capacities. And it was a very challenging time for the population to live through. And I think that, with the Trump years, I think that politically it was very difficult for Arab American. It was like neither party really was welcoming to the Arab American community in that period. And it wasn't until Trump came into office, really, with his really strong anti-Arab rhetoric, that you saw the Democratic Party really reaching out to the Arab population here. And this is when you saw sort of the left progressive part of, Bernie Sanders, the Bernie Bros in Dearborn, they call him Ammo Bernie, which means Uncle Bernie, So we saw this sort of on the bigger national stage. We saw Muslims being sort of pushed to the front of the Black Lives Matter movement or other sort of socially progressive movements of the period, and they were being embraced by the left. Now, the right didn't necessarily shift its position on these populations. But the difference between that and now is that now, because speech in support of Palestine is really being problematized. It's being criminalized actually by the Trump administration, and the Democrats aren't necessarily coming to the defense of the Arab community the way they were in the past. Or it was Biden, a progressive Democrat, who actually was the one who gave such incredible support to Israel in its decimation of Gaza, its genocide in Gaza, right? So the racism, there's a way that racism affects you and your neighbor, right? The way you talk to your neighbor, the way the neighbor responds to you. But there's also the racism that enables our government to destroy whole communities, to play a significant part in destroying whole communities overseas, right? And I think that's the bind that Arab Americans find themselves in. It's like, they're American, they know they're American, they feel American, they want to be American, they're making homes for themselves here. And we explore so many ways in which that's happening in the book. But at the same time, they see that our government, basically is willing to, support things that are so hurtful and harmful for Arabs overseas. And so it reinforces the idea that, Detroit is an uncertain refuge for people. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Professor Howell, for you as a historian, as a professor of Arab American studies, I'm guessing that this moment in time, specifically, I'm talking about the war in Gaza, is really going to be something that you are studying and looking at as this defining moment when it comes to Arab Americans in Metro Detroit and their political path forward. Is that accurate?
It is accurate. Just on Sunday, I was talking to a Yemeni American activist who, I talked to maybe 3 years ago. And, she was definitely a progressive Democrat at the time. And she was one of the people who supported the Abandon Biden campaign here, which had Arab Americans not voting for Biden in the primary, specifically to show that as a voting bloc, their population mattered, right? And she is one of the people who, in this last election cycle, actually wound up supporting President Trump. And this is because she saw Trump saying that he was going to end the war in Gaza. She said that the number one thing that matters to her is Gaza. That's the only thing she's thinking about as a Yemeni American. And of course, now, the government is bombing Yemen more than it was under Biden. And Trump has some pretty out there plans for ethnic cleansing in Gaza. But she's still sort of sticking with her support. And this has to do with that, what I referred to before, is the community being orphaned politically. Where do they go? So it's a real time of transition in the population. And again, people are, making such a difference, fighting for environmental justice in the south end of Dearborn, fighting for women's rights. Grocery store owners in the city of Detroit, really sort of with this micro lending that they're doing in the neighborhoods that their stores are in, providing opportunity for people in the neighborhood around themselves, Sorry, I lost the thread of what I was saying because I can hear the music coming on.
No, that is perfect, Professor Howell. That is exactly, I think, where we should leave it. Sally Howell is a professor of history and Arab American studies at University of Michigan-Dearborn. Her new book is Beyond Refuge in Arab Detroit. Professor Howell, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
Thank you, Robin.
Coming up, over 200 immigrants have recently been detained at the Detroit, Canada border after making a wrong turn. Advocates say the border isn't equipped for this kind of detention. We'll learn more. Stay with us. This is The Metro.